Hey everyone, in today's video I want to discuss how the entity taking Jill Valentine, Leon S. Kennedy, and the Nemesis affects the Resident Evil timeline, as these characters being taken very much intervenes with certain events and potentially results in apocalyptic scenarios within the Resident Evil universe, and all because they were taken by the entity. Of course, Dead by Daylight's lore occurs within a multiverse, meaning the instances where Leon, Jill, and Nemesis are taken is just one of infinite possibilities. However, it does still mean that the universe they are taken from is potentially doomed. First thing I want to do is to try and pinpoint when during Resident Evil 2 and 3 that Jill, Leon, and Nemesis, and I guess Claire too, are taken by the entity. Both of these stories happen somewhat concurrently, but both are based within Racoon City, where the T-virus has broken out and the city has become infected with it, and most people have turned into zombies. Jill is in the city when it happens, and Leon and Claire arrive 24 hours after, I believe. Let's start first with both Jill and Nemesis, as their stories work pretty much together. The iteration of Jill and Nemesis that we have in DBD is the Resident Evil 3 2020 remake versions, and so we'll be specifically using the chronology of the remake games. The Dead by Daylight Resident Evil lore is short, but this does make it kinda easy to identify the exact part of the story in which Jill and Nemesis are taken. Jill's lore reads, excelling at lockpicking and bomb disposal, Jill Valentine was a brilliant special tactics and rescue service agent. After bravely rescuing her team members from a devastating biohazard, she returned to Racoon City to save any survivors left behind. But a lethal and ruthless super soldier labeled Nemesis was on her trail. After dealing the Nemesis a few blows, Jill rushed to the basement and picked the lock of a cold room. Once inside, her body turned numb as a black fog engulfed her. So it states specifically that Jill is taken when she rushes to the basement. Now, presumably this means the moment when Jill discovers the underground nest lab beneath the hospital. My suspicion is specifically that it's this doorway in the gameplay here, which also has a lockpick and leads down to a cold looking room, which then leads on to an elevator which leads into the nest lab, which is basically where I would argue the most important events of the game happens. Okay, let's read the Nemesis lore now. Designed by Umbrella Corporation, the Nemesis is a nearly unstoppable bioorganic weapon fixated on pursuing and eliminating its targets. Part of the Tyrant T-103 series, this specimen has increased intelligence and awareness due to the NEA parasite implanted within it. Its first mission unleashed it upon Racoon City, where it had a singular objective: exterminate STARS members. Rampaging through the city, the Nemesis faced off against Jill Valentine multiple times, and though she managed to escape, he was never far behind. He nearly had his target when a strange fog descended upon them, mixing with the smoke of a city in chaos. The phenomenon meant nothing to him, the frigid cold and decreased oxygen never posing a threat. All that mattered was soldiering on into the fog, continuing the mission, find STARS, exterminate STARS, and kill anyone who gets in the way. So Nemesis's lore would also align with Jill's if it were this point in the story in which she was taken, as up to here they've had multiple encounters already and are close to their final encounter at this point too. The only slightly confusing part is that it states a strange fog descended upon them, mixing with the smoke of a city in chaos, which suggests neither of the characters have reached the hospital and are still within the city streets themselves. It's ambiguous though, and I guess the fog could easily come indoors. That's not exactly unheard of in the Dead by Daylight lore. Either way, however, it doesn't really matter, I'd argue, as the most important thing is the end point of Resident Evil 3. So whether Jill and Nemesis are taken an hour into the story or seconds before the end, it's more so important that Nemesis isn't killed and Jill doesn't manage to experience what she does and survive with the knowledge of what happened in Racoon City. Alright, let's move on to Leon's story, which is the 2019 Resident Evil 2 remake, which takes place 24 hours after the events of Resident Evil 3 and begins with Leon and Claire arriving in Racoon City and going to the Racoon City Police Department. So here's Leon's lore. Having faced hordes of zombies on his first day as a police officer, Leon S. Kennedy had to learn the job quickly. Investigating the biohazard that had ravaged Racoon City, Leon infiltrated an abandoned Umbrella Corporation laboratory, where a sudden and unexpected black fog led him astray. For the purpose of simplicity and from what it seems to be the most likely possibility, as both stories somewhat align with Jill and Leon entering the nest lab, I have to assume that each are taken just before they reach the lab itself and are capable of trying to procure a vaccine for the T-virus and sample for the G-virus. We can also assume, as Claire and Leon's stories run concurrently, that Claire is also taken at the point of entering the nest lab. Okay, so with this knowledge, let's try and get an understanding of the possible repercussions of Jill, Leon, Claire, and Nemesis getting taken in this moment. Now, one of the biggest outcomes of Resident Evil 2 and 3 is that our main character characters all uncover some form of wrongdoing by Umbrella, who were the corporation who caused the virus and the zombies basically. Jill already has a degree of knowledge and distrust in Umbrella after the events of the first game, but in these two games they uncover the G and T virus being created and also a recording of the city and how it became infected with the T virus to begin with. None of the characters actually managed to get out of Racoon City with T virus or G virus samples or vaccines, but the important part is that they escape with the knowledge of what happened, only briefly too, as right after they escape a thermonuclear bomb is dropped onto Racoon City. So basically in this Dead by Daylight Resident Evil universe, there are no survivors of Racoon City who actually know what happened there, aside those who work for Umbrella, such as Nikolai, who's one of the bad guys in the game basically, and therefore are not going to try and expose their own wrongdoings. However, there are also downsides for Umbrella due to the absence of Jill, Leon and Claire failing to explore the Nest Lab. As a result of Claire being taken, Sherry Birkin dies. More specifically, the wound she was inflicted with from her father, William Birkin, infects her and spreads to Sherry due to their shared DNA, and she becomes mutated also, spreading the G virus further. This also allows Annette to complete her goal, although this does likely result in her death also at the hands of William later on, as William Birkin is not killed by Leon or Claire and Ada is injured due to her falling into the trash compactor. During her encounter with Annette, Ada is unable to retrieve any samples from William Birkin and also possibly dies by his or mutated Sherry's hand as a result. Alternately, she is killed within the compactor as Leon does not reach her. This also means that Wesker does not get any samples of the G virus, as Ada cannot escape with samples of William's flesh if he hasn't been killed. Despite Jill's disappearance, Tyrell and Carlos can still infiltrate the RPD where they find the T virus sample. However, they likely never find out about Umbrella trying to erase the vaccine and evidence of them causing the outbreak, as Jill isn't there to get injured, and therefore there is no need to go to Bard's office in the hospital. This also potentially means that they remain loyal to Umbrella. They call the government regardless, asking for time to get a vaccine before the bombs are dropped on the city, and so Carlos and Tyrell enter the Nest Lab. Jill isn't there to create the vaccine though. However, as Nemesis also isn't there, Tyrell survives, and they likely manage to create the vaccine as Jill was supposed to regardless. Nikolai catches up with Carlos and Tyrell, and as he is supposed to, destroys the vaccine and fatally wounds them, as they are no use. Jill was kept alive for the purpose of gathering combat data on Nemesis. As Nemesis is no longer pursuing Jill at this point, Nikolai breaks the vaccine and shoots both Carlos and Tyrell. This results in Carlos and Tyrell both dying from the thermonuclear explosion that destroys Racoon City and their knowledge with it. As Claire and Leon are not able to enter the Nest Lab and uncover what happened, no one discovers that William tried to sell the G virus, or that he was killed by Umbrella, and dropped the T virus samples, causing the outbreak to begin with. Claire Redfield does not discover the proof of how the outbreak started in Racoon City before the city is nuked. Jill does not have the vital information nor the vaccine, Leon does not recover any samples, and his lack of being at the lab means Annette Birkin and Ada both die to William Birkin, most likely. Umbrella basically gets away with what they did, releasing the T virus and G virus. However, they are robbed of any valuable combat data from the Nemesis and its later mutations, I guess, so that's something. Basically, that universe is kinda screwed and leaves Umbrella unaccounted for in many ways, without a single person able to reveal the truth, aside those who are loyal to Umbrella who are trying to stop that truth from being revealed. In a much broader scope, this means that the universe as a whole will go down a completely different route, as Chris and Claire are not present, and Jill and Leon aren't either. These four basically being the main protagonists throughout most of the games. I'm not exactly heavily versed in Resident Evil lore, but for example, the events of Resident Evil 4, a later game I've actually played, could go completely differently without Leon's presence, and without the knowledge of Umbrella's wrongdoings, potentially resulting in the Los Illuminados and Sadler succeeding in their plan, infecting Ashley Graham with the Plagas, and as a result, the President of the United States, allowing Sadler to effectively complete his scheme and begin his path to world domination, just as one of the examples. Yup, well that's it. I do hope you enjoyed, and let me know if there's any adjustments you'd make to this or if I got anything wrong. I'm not a pro when it comes to the Resident Evil universe. I watched a lot of videos to try and get up to speed with this, so I hope I did a good job. Thanks, and goodbye.